This this is really going to build off the conversation that we just had about business, and the thing is, everybody's got perspectives on business, on policy, so others may jump in as well. But we really wanted to have an opportunity to look at what some of the implications are and some of the recommendations, and the discussion started, I think, at the end of the last conversation, and Alia, we're starting, so I don't know. Anyways, so I just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to give a bit of an opening salvo in terms of when we talk about, first of all, when we talk about immigration policy, what specifically are we talking about? Are we talking just about the legislative stuff? Are we talking about the implementation? Or are we also talking about funding for different services? So maybe you can define what you think of when we're asking the question, what needs to change. And I'll let you start it because this is your fault.
I apologize, everybody.
And introduce yourselves, what your organizations do, and what your perspective is on this.
So I'm Patrick MacKenzie. I'm with the Immigrant Employment Council of British Columbia. First off, I really just want to thank the University Institute for pulling all of this together. I told Wendy I was coming into town. Did you have time for a cup of coffee? And this was the cup of coffee. But the DI team and to my team, Rania, and I still consider Sahara my team. Used to work with us. Just grateful that we could get together like this. At the Immigrant Employment Council in BC, we're a slightly different nonprofit in the settlement space. We're actually not focused on the immigrant, which may sound strange given that that's in our title, but it's the employment part that matters. And who matters most in employment? It's the employer. And so the Immigrant Employment Council of BC was born as an answer to the question, who's getting the labor market ready for immigrants? Because there are lots of folks trying to get immigrants ready for the labor market. And so for us, and I've said this to my team before, like I'll fire you if I ever hear you show up to an employer and say it's a good thing you hired immigrants. It would be nice for you to do. And it's like, no, that's not a business's job to do the nice thing. They have to be ethical with that. They have to, adhere to the law and whatnot. But immigrants are this incredible untapped resource in Canada. I mean, and that for us is we want to see the country do well. We want to see the economy do well, and subsequently individuals will do well. If you give an immigrant or any, honestly, the opportunity to participate at their sort of maximum value, that's tremendous for them, but that's so much better for the rest of us. And actually gives us the fuel to fire that just society we're all here looking.
Thanks. And what would you like to add on the policy?
Oh, it's a little bit tough. I think that from a manufacturing perspective, so what's happening in the manufacturing sector is probably for with everything that's happened with Trump, we've hit a point where we were just pre-2024 growing as an industry, but we sort of stagnated a little bit. So there's a lot of hesitation, a lot of pause on investment, with the exception of trying to come more with things like that that we talked about earlier. But even with what Prime Minister Carney is going to be doing with his nation building projects, we need an economy that's going to be operating on all cylinders. And right now we have a labor market issue, quite frankly. So I fully believe that, back to what I said before, we have an underutilization issue here, and we're not utilizing particular capacity. Again, the cab driver who's got the medical degree or the dentist that's working at the 7-Eleven, that's a good story, but that we can't afford for that to happen any further. And I think from a policy perspective, it's about IOCC realizing that there are root causes to some of these And what can they do to solve it? Like when I go in to see, and I don't have a relationship with ours, so just make that clear. But when I see my government clients, I can tell what's wrong with the manufacturing industry, how they can support us to make it better. And I think that's the part that we need more engagement with these policy makers.
Thanks so much.
Marvin Cruz, Senior Director of Research for the Indian Federation of Independent Business. I've been at the CFIB for 25 years now, so I've seen a lot of things going on with small business and we deal a lot with policy that tries to improve the situation for small businesses, whatever it's, whether it's taxation, paperwork, all these type of things. You know what I'm talking about, just what we deal with. So it is reality and we push for better change so that your business can do a lot better than it currently is, or you want to grow, but whatever it is you want to do. But my expertise pretty much is in all facets of small business data. Right. So we do about 50 surveys a year, survey our members on all different situations that are going on. Among those things is the immigration, what is going on there. We went, as I mentioned earlier, we were talking to newcomers as well. It's a very difficult week to get at. And in order to do all of these things, you kind of have to bring all of these pieces together. The solution doesn't come from one, it comes from all. So when we put our research together, we make sure that we're looking at every single angle to come up with policy that drives practical change. If we don't have practical solutions to things, talking about positive something. It'll either be not important, too difficult, not well thought out. So we have to develop solutions that kind of try to do that as best as possible. That's when we come at it from every single side and we recommend something. So that's just the direction there. So you know where my answers are coming from in this session. That's how it's all set pretty much.
So answer your question that you posed to the last.
I can't remember what I asked. Look it up.
Solutions, you want solutions.
Step one, step two.
So what are your big recommendations?
On the immigration side of things, my thing, I see, because I was mostly focusing also on the newcomer experience, because that's really difficult. Those first few years when you're coming in, even as an entrepreneur, those first 2 years, they're difficult enough just trying to integrate into society, let alone trying to understand how to run a business in that system. So what we found out is that a lot of it had to do with networking. How do they find their network? How do they build that network? And there's a real trust issue when it comes to the different programs that are out there and available for them. They don't know who to trust. They don't know who to go to. So it all becomes kind of hit and miss. And hit and miss when you try to start a business or when you try to run a business isn't necessarily the way you want things to go, but that's usually the case as well, right? So I think for the most part, on the on my focus would be on newcomers as they're coming in. How do we help that stream? Because one of the biggest issues that we have in this country is the fact that small businesses are on the decline. If you look at the data, the last 8 quarters, new business entries below historical averages. We were predicting an entrepreneurial drought just recently. You have 2 quarters of negative growth for business entry. That is business entry. And that is the result of pretty much the way the economy is right now. Would you want to start a business right now? Probably not. And that's what we're also finding in our surveys, that when we're asking, just folks in the general public, would you be willing to start a business? Or if you ask business owners, would you recommend somebody to start a business? The answer is likely a high no. You get, about 70%, 60-70% telling you they don't want to start that business right now. That is a real problem. So if you want to get at, how we fix the immigration side, the labor side, you provide those businesses. You ensure that the business that you have now can also carry forward. So succession planning, which is also a big focus that we have, is highly important from an economic and from a Canada standpoint. If you try to build Canada strong, you have to make sure that those businesses remain viable and are there to sustain everything, whether it's labor, whether it's, goods and services that are available. If you don't have a strong business community, this isn't going to work. So it has to start there. So from the business perspective, what we're seeing, go on, but let me stop at some point. But from the business community, what we're seeing is that the level of taxation for them and where it hits is really hurting them right now, particularly with the situation that's going on, the economic uncertainty, they don't know where to put their money, where to invest. Should I invest? They're dealing with that. Our businesses in Alberta are having that issue, same issue on the separation front. Those kind of discussions are leading to sort of negative takeaways, or where do I go with my money? Where do I invest? Do I buy to Canada? Do I stay in Canada? All of these things are what businesses are currently considering. And that situation is placing Canada pretty much in a very difficult spot right now. Is how do we, as a country, looking to grow without immigration, and then grow with declining businesses? You tell me where you're going to find the solutions to that.
Marvin, sorry, can you expand on that tax issue? Is it corporate taxes? Is it personal taxes? Maybe more insight.
It'll be corporate taxes will always be right at the top, right? You know, most businesses are incorporated. So they're going to be right at the top. Then you have personal taxes, because some business owners are not incorporated, file through personal income taxes again. And then after that, we have gas taxes right now. So gasoline is through the roof. What we're seeing is that they're having to cut back on many different things just to make sure that they are able to support not only their transportation costs for those businesses, but also the costs that they themselves are now paying out because of those gas prices. So if gas prices go up, all of these different businesses that you're buying from are increasing their prices as well, because they have to. So this sort of climbing cost is what's sort of, really creating a pressure on businesses to do something. So the ongoing cost of business, that needs to be addressed in some way. And it is being addressed by reducing gas prices. We're putting a halt on, the gas taxes themselves, not reducing gas prices, but the taxes themselves, the on those taxes are a solution. So that's where we come in, is trying to find those practical solutions where they exist. So we're not going to be able to, stop the war. We're not going to be able to pull down the gas prices ourselves, but where can we find solutions? And that's why I asked the question, I think. It's because we can't tackle everything from every different angle. When you speak to government, they will tell you that they have so many priorities, they don't know where to put their efforts. With immigration, you have to point at where is it that you need it most. If you say that it's in the manufacturing industry, they'll come back and say they say nurses we need more nurses in Canada, we need more doctors in Canada. So the medical practice becomes an issue as well. So the whole thing is that this is all a very expansive ecosystem, and it's trying to find solutions within that ecosystem that fit each one in a way that can help, not necessarily a clear solution to it, but helps. I can go on with the medical side of things. Last year we did a study on the paper burden that doctors are experiencing. And right now what we're seeing is the doctors are actually, those that are in medical school are actually pulling back on wanting to do this, just based on the amount of paper burden that they are having to do. It can take them up to 45 minutes to do a single form. So when you're doing that, trying to run a business, see more patients, likely not going to happen. So that's where we're seeing sort of where's the give and take? And that's essentially where the policy comes from. What is the give and take? What are you willing to sort of give in order to take? Because not everything is going to work, and you have to be able to find, the right solutions in areas. I'm going on too long, sorry.
No, it's hot pursuit.
No, I think that kind of brings you back to the question that sort of ended off the last panel was around narrative, and the stories that we're telling. But I think you have to step back from there. We have to ask ourselves, why do we do it? Like, if you're asking me my policy, where am I coming at a policy perspective on immigration? Is why are we doing immigration? And the funny thing is that immigration will just happen. You can build a wall 30 feet tall, 30 feet thick, in Canada or around the country. People will still move. And I mean, just look to the southern border of the US if you want to see the data. The harder they make it across the border, the larger the undocumented population in the United States. It just grows. In Canada, so we make it impossible to migrate, people still migrate. And so we have to ask ourselves, and I think we just have to acknowledge immigration is neither good nor bad, it just is. Are we going to do it well, or are we going to do it poorly? Now, I may have an unpopular sort of view on this. I don't actually think our immigration system is broken. I don't think it's fit for purpose. I think it does essentially what it was designed to do. Except over the last 10 years, I kind of forgot why we did it. When I remember being in a room with the Minister of Immigration at the time, where he started talking about 500,000 permanent residents to Canada. And this is at a time when we were taking about 300,000, 327, something like that. And all I can think is that where on earth does this number come from? And why is that number even relevant if we're not talking about the composition? What's in that number? And realistically, we have to step back and say, what do we want to accomplish with immigration? And for decades, it's priority number one has been support the economy. We can tell a story about community building, we can tell a story about being a place of sanctuary, we can tell a story about we're lovely, welcoming people that love multiculturalism and a diverse society. All of that's true. That is not our primary reason for doing immigration. And if you doubt me on that, take a look at the numbers we brought in for decades. 60%, roughly 60% economic, 40% everybody else. But we still expect the other 40% to go to work at some point. We don't want to forget that. But the and so I do think we have to step back and really be clear on why we want this. And we're worried right now about anti-immigrant backlash. There actually isn't as much anti-immigrant backlash as we're led to believe. It's anti-immigration system backlash, I guess, is maybe how you want to say it. Canadians don't trust the system. Businesses don't feel the immigration system serves them because it takes forever to get somebody to the LMIA. I had a conversation with the former deputy minister of IRCC, about a year ago. And one of the things I said was, I feel really badly for you because it feels like you're being forced to make a whole bunch of bad decisions to try and correct a whole bunch of bad decisions. I said, I'm not sure why we think this is going to get us to where we want to be in the system. But then the other thing was, it was an LMIA. I said, well, we see. Oh, sorry, labor market. Sorry, you can take the boy out of government, but you cannot beat the government. The labor market impact assessment. So this is where a business has to go and prove to the government that they can't find a kid down the street to do that job. And then they need to create a temporary fund, essentially. And when we go and talk to employers, or when IRCC goes to talk to employers, the LMIA is often brought up right away. And of course, the answer is, well, that's not us, that's the SLEC. And I said, if for decades, the LMIA and its LMO or whatever it was called, like whatever the predecessor was to that thing, like the permission slip you needed to be able to submit an application. If for decades, people have been confusing who's responsible for it, maybe the wrong person's responsible for it. And like we have to also be responsive to our people, the Canadian public. And so we really need a clear definition, a clear idea of doing SRM if we want people to trust immigration. And then we need to deliver. And so then Marvin earlier asked, how do we get support essentially? Right now, if you want federal government support, the narrative has to be running about what's it? It has to be. But we also have to be careful and get shoehorn everything into an economic argument. So then you look like food. The settlement sector, a lot of folks I work with, we're our own worst enemies. Because we want to talk about immigrants as this wonderful untapped resource. And if you ask World Bank back in 2018 how much it was worth, it's $50 billion. To the economy of unrealized economic activity because we were underemploying immigrants. Well, that was 2018. Everything cost a lot less in 2018 and there were fewer immigrants. So you can imagine that number's much higher rate. And I heard the Prime Minister talk in Vancouver a couple weeks ago, and he was all excited that the projected deficit was $11 billion less than it was going to be, than they had said earlier. So he was going to get excited over $11 billion. And imagine if you could get an untapped resource out of the ground with zero environmental impact that was going to get you $50 billion a year. Like everybody in that shovel in the ground right there. So why aren't we doing it? But the other, the other issue, though, come back to settlement sector, is people talk about them as this great untapped resource. And then in the next breath, we say, wow, these poor vulnerable folks, they need our help. It's, you know, it's a poor Andrew, he doesn't, you know, he doesn't speak English from so if he give me money to train him, he'll do better. Or he doesn't have this, or he doesn't have that. It's the settlement industrial complex that's trying to feed us. That's actually getting in the way of a lot of the progress that we've been making. So it's the same case as the redneck that goes, oh, these useless immigrants coming in here, living on the dole, taking all our jobs. But you can't do both. Right, and it's the same in the settlement perspective. We can't say they're this wonderful resource, and then at the same time say, well, actually, it's a pretty useless resource unless you pay me to turn that get that diamond in the rough.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that because I don't think it's just the settlement sector, although, you know, I often talk about the programs that are training people for imaginary jobs, which are frankly a problem where the focus is on getting the bums in seats to justify the grant rather than being laser focused on the outcomes. And in fact, a lot of settlement organizations don't actually have strong relationships with the full range of employers, particularly SMEs, but we might as well offend everybody. So, you know, I think post-secondary institutions have a lot to answer for, you know, because a lot of the they're called bridging programs, we're kind of bridging programs to nowhere. You know, they would say, oh, doctor, come do this course. They pass or engineers were another example. They do the course, they pass the test, but if there are no placements, they're not going to get their professional credentials and be able to actually practice. So I think it's, you know, for me, in addition to the alignment around the messaging, in addition, and the data and the focus on the economy, in addition to remembering that people don't act based on facts typically, and that's why I thought Angela's comments about how we get people's hearts as well as their minds is really important. But for me, one of the things that's also critical is accountability. And you know, when we hear about taxes being an issue, I've never understood why fiscal responsibility is viewed as a kind of right-wing neoliberal conspiracy, as opposed to a way of ensuring that we have the resources we need to do the stuff we want to get done. And so Patrick's unpopular in some circles. I'm very unpopular in others because I do feel that the issues around outcomes and accountability are something we should all link arms and really enforce. And when you see those predatory training programs, and there are laws, we should point them out. Because part of the issue, you know, it was, I think Ogilvy said, half my advertising money is wasted. I don't know which half. I feel the same way. The same thing is true with a lot of government programming. Some of it is really, really good, and some of it is just pouring money down holes. And don't get me started on the English language or French language training in Canada. It's shameful the extent to which we spend not just money, but people's time. And that was one of the things I really wanted to point out about SMEs. It isn't the cost of training in terms of it costs this much money to take the course. It's time. Because if an SME lets one of their 10 people go off on training, that's one person who's not contributing to the bottom line. And larger corporations just have a lot more flexibility and slack. So I think, you know, I would be someone who would argue that when we're talking about immigration policy, we're not just talking about levels, and we're not just talking about this stream or that stream who makes the decision. We have to really take a holistic perspective, and everybody's got a piece of the story, and everybody's got to be responsible.
You know what, I'll defend government a little bit here.
Okay.
Take it a little bit in a different, I've been working with the government for the last several years, and I have to say, underneath this new government, I have never seen bureaucrats be so engaged as they ever have before, provincially and federal. It actually gives me a lot of hope, quite frankly, in the years ahead. They're also, again, I can't speak for every department and they have problems, but they're making some very sound strategic decisions right now. And honestly, I think that, you said it well, the economy is what's going to drive change. And that's what's ahead of us over the next little bit. I will beat up on post-secondary institutions though, because there has been a lot of issues. There has been some very bad actors. And some of that is dealt with, especially at some of those colleges that were really giving training with no return. But they're also not in tune with the labor market. And they're not in tune with what employers need. And so the number, especially in manufacturing, I can tell you, very few organizations will send people to a post-secondary institution for training. Yeah, they're taking it on themselves at massive cost to themselves. So this is sort of not a great time for post-secondary institutions, to be honest, either. This is when you need them. So I think there's a revitalization on many accounts. Immigration is going to be still, at least for our sector and for many others, it's still going to be part of the solution for Canada. And I think it will require some bright lines to help figure out how we can make it better.
Just on the solution side, you're absolutely right in terms of, it starts with the economy. And like you said, it's a matter of making sure that that messaging is out there that, immigration can do this for the economy. And the numbers that we have are kind of dated, and at this point, it's a stigma on it as well. There's going to be a negative connotation in terms of any number they're going to see down. There's going to be a likelihood of not believing that number or whatever it is, but we still have to push in that direction to see those new numbers, to see what immigration would do for this country in that sense. Last year we did a study, or a couple of years ago, we did a study on internal trade. Internal trade now is in everybody's mouth, right? People are aware of this, they see it on the news. Trust me, when I wrote that report 4 years ago, nobody cared. And at the time, what the main problem with it was difficult to put a number on that issue. We met with several people in government, and on the spot in one meeting, one of the, I'll say the premier at the time of some province, actually put it forward and said, let's get a paper on this. A cost came out of that, and that cost was started this whole engine. And then obviously had the right lever with the Trump administration. So now you found a solution and you saw what that solution was worth. And then we're able to push for change in that way. So something that seemed not in the ether at the time became very much so because of the situation we're in. And right now we're in a situation where we're not doing very well. Businesses aren't doing very well. So coming up with some solutions and putting those numbers out there to say, this is how it can help, and this is how it can help responsibly. Because the thing is, people have a negative stigma on it right now, and it's how do we do this responsibly is going to be the main thing, the main challenge we're going to have to overcome.
I think, like with both of them, and Raph, you got me thinking about this. Like, you said it exactly how it needs to be said. Immigration is going to be part of that solution for. And for folks who are focused on immigration, and not only am I only focused on immigration, I'm focused on economic immigration. So if when I talk about immigration, it narrows down my scope, and I need to be mindful of others who have a different scope. But we need to place immigration in the proper context, no matter where we're talking about. And so, yes, labor market growth is coming from immigration. However, it's the domestic supply, it's the school leaders that are the real lion's share of it. What we're missing in Canada is a coherent strategy around sort of an industrial strategy for Canada that links together everything that we're trying to do. And a labor market strategy that's coherent, that flows from that has, an immigrant chapter in that strategy, or, a mid-career transition, or, older people needing, want to have them in the labor market. So we can figure out how each piece works together. And we're not, like, one of the challenges especially for your members, for small businesses, is that they'll have, a guy like me show up and say, well, the immigrant count, well, it's one that you should look at. And then there's another one that says, you need to be hiring more women. And then it's not, it's how do you thought about persons with disabilities? And it's really, and it comes back to something Angela was saying to me earlier at the table. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not so much about any specific person or group or any one specific area, but it's really more about how do we help folks understand the talent that's out there, and not ignore it. And these are my words, and I don't want to put anything in. I don't know if it's just words and inches, but it's not about hiring someone because they are an immigrant. They're hiring someone because they're a person with a disability. It's about making sure they're not ignored for the wrong reasons. Right? Ultimately, if I'm concerned about the economy and a given business doing well, I want to hire the person that can do the job best. And we have, so we have employers saying they can't find talent. We have talent that they can't find a job. We're clearly not, like, there may be missing skills there, sure. I think the greatest missing skill is actually understanding how to find skills. It's, I have a Bachelor of Public Relations from Massachusetts University in Halifax. In no way, shape, or form does that tell you what I can actually do. The fact that I have that credential. It may tell you what I can't do, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what I can do. And I think if we're talking about practical sort of policy solutions, we really need to move our selection on the economic side. And remember, I'm not talking about how we pick refugees. I'm not talking about how we reunite families. But when we decide we're going to pick people because they're going to support the economy, we need to figure out how to look at skill and not credential. We use credentials as proxy for ability. It works well enough. None of the people who hired me in this job had ever set foot on the campus of the university I went to, but because it was a Canadian university, they trusted that we kind of, it's similar. Well, when you're asking them to trust a credential from a school they've never heard of, in a city they may not have heard of, in a country that they probably couldn't label on an unlabeled map, right? The trust breaks down. But if we can get the immigration system to select for skill and employers to select for skill, I think that's a real chance to unleash the potential that's there. So I can say it easily, but I know it's a lot harder than that.
I'll take us down this recruitment rabbit hole actually. So my life before manufacturing was in recruitment. I led recruitment for Canada Post and a company called Nav Canada, who are the air traffic controllers. I know how hard it is to recruit people. We used to recruit for Canada Post. We were doing 11,000 a year, and everything from the resume screening to checking credentials, everything like that was like formula. I'm actually very hopeful now about what AI can potentially do to break down some of the bias that comes in resume screening. Maybe even look at opportunities to recognize skill instead of credentials, and maybe even a way to start creating some clarity around maybe not looking for just Canadian experience, being able to truly understand what international experience might be related to the jobs that we might have. So I think even as we're talking from a local small business perspective, I think that's the type of thinking that we need to get into the hands of business, be able to move faster and more effectively.
I'll just add to that, because I think, Patrick did some work on pre-arrival assessments. And I do think our selection processes are really flawed. Like reading someone's CV, looking at their credentials doesn't tell you anything. Interviews are the worst, to tell you the truth, right? Psychopaths do really well in interviews because they tell you exactly what you want to hear. And so we've started doing, and now it's really hard to figure out if it's the applicant wrote the letter, wrote the CV, or my true love Perplexity or ChatGPT or whatever. So I think, there are some opportunities for occupational testing. Probably, I talked to Chris Campbell, was the head of the Carpenters Union for a long time. And he said, blueprints are universal language. Like, I want to know what someone can do. I give them a hammer and a piece of wood or whatever they do and go in the corner and show me what you can do. And there are equivalents across professions that we can actually use to try to figure out what people can or cannot do. And that for me is one of the critical things in terms of screening. In terms of the recruitment process, I had a couple of stories. One was company in Picton said that they were trying to hire for some technical roles. And they kept getting ghosted. You know, I thought that only happened in dating circles where someone makes an appointment and doesn't show up. But it was happening with employers, right? Where they would have people apply, they'd invite them for interviews, they just wouldn't come. They made one change to their job ads. They added the line, internationally educated professionals welcome. They got twice as many applications and much better quality applicants. So sometimes, you know, back again to Angela's point about making people feel welcome, helping people navigate, there's sometimes very simple things that you can do. We know very well that, and this came out of the CFIB study of youth looking for jobs. So youth looking for jobs, what do? They go online. Small businesses looking for employees, what do? They ask people they know, right? So often there's also a mismatch between the strategies people are using, and we know in Canada it's who you know, not what you know, and that's why helping immigrants build social capital is transformational. Yes, skills are important. Often they have the skills, but it's the capital. It's understanding how to use LinkedIn to find someone who knows somebody who will help you get in the door. It's you know, as I said, one of the strongest tools I think we have at our disposal right now that we need to extend more to newcomers is work integrated learning, where it's kind of try it, you like it. If government can help de-risk those initial that initial work, often there are lots of people who would hire someone and take a chance on them. And based on what I've seen, if they work the way they typically work, they will have a permanent job. So I think there's some clever ways that we can invest strategically to open doors and to help people navigate. And I do think we also have to be, and it comes back to the point that was being made about how we spend money and how we will, you know, we'll give hundreds of millions of dollars to a new startup or a, you know, international company that's going to come to Canada and so on. Tech companies are high risk. The startup visa program was very high risk, a very high risk pathway, because we have a hard time, like 90% of companies in Canadian incubators fail. That's just a fact. Instead of a startup visa, I would like to see an entrepreneurial visa that isn't tied to tech, is tied to succession planning. Because that is, we need people who are going to take over the farms and know how to run the farms, right? Like agriculture, you know, manufacturing is important because they make stuff. Agriculture is really important because you can't eat money, right? And especially with the trade dislocation. So one of the things I do think the government has done well is trying to bring a sectoral focus, because the needs in agriculture are really different they're similar in some ways, but different in other ways. From manufacturing, you've got different geographies, et cetera, et cetera. So I think
Subsector of manufacturing.
food processing, just not growing food too.
Yeah.
Wow, I did not know that. I did not know.
Does it all.
He does it all. Okay. Maybe I like you as much as my perplexity agent. But I guess what I'm saying is I think we've talked a lot about kind of big picture political will, the system's not broken, it needs tweaking, we need the economic focus. I do think there's lots of stuff that's really obvious and we just need to get on with it. And that would be one of my, one of my key takeaways is that we need to, I think everyone in the room shares some views, we differ on this versus that. But how do we make sure those messages are getting delivered to the people who are actually going to make the decisions? And that's why I frankly like the discussion around advocacy and policy and how we make sure that we are pushing in the same direction. Because I haven't heard a lot of disagreement today, despite the huge differences in people's backgrounds and orientations and where they're coming from. So for me, it's a really useful kind of start of a longer conversation. But we have a few minutes left, so I will let the panelists close this out with any final thoughts about what we know we should do and perhaps where we have questions that we need to further explore.
Thanks, Wendy. I actually think we have a lot of the tools already in the tool belt. We're just not assembled it in a way that gets us the best value out of it. It's just, again, to think about immigrant selection and economic selection. We have a lot of different streams that we've tried to create as a country to meet specific needs. And I think to step back and look at something like the express entry system, which was initially designed to give everybody a sense, the applicant, the potential applicant, and the country, a sense of how well we'll do when they get here. What might it look like for you to come here? One of the bits of potential that was sort of promised with express entry, which never really came about, but still could, was that imagine if you could actually turn that into an inventory of people around the world who are interested in coming to Canada, and then give employers access to that inventory to look through the skills that are in there. But it has to be done in a way that the potential applicant understands how to sell themselves to Canadian business. That the Canadian business understands how to interpret what's being sold to them. And so there's still a lot of work to be done, but we have these tools that could help make immigration much more employer-centric. And I don't mean that it only serves the employer. Clearly not. Well, clear to me, but I have to say it loud so that people understand it. For Canada to promise opportunity to folks who have options and have them punch the Canada card and ignore the other options they had. And when they get here, the opportunity doesn't exist in the way they were told. That's unconscionable. And it doesn't have to happen. So I think we could, with some, I don't want to say tweaks that you're playing around the edges here. It's not an easy thing. But there is a willingness, there are the tools, and by and large, employers I want to say employers are really good people who want to do good things and grow their communities, and we want to tap into that.
Great. I would agree with you. Tools are there, and and I also agree with what you said. Don't hire someone because you think it's the right thing to do. Do it because they need to do it. And I think that if we can figure that part out, I think that's where we start progressing and go frank. But it will take a lot of, like, this has been a great event, and this is an important discussion to have today. And so thankful that you invited me here today to join in on this. But this needs to happen more. This needs to happen from the right people at the table. You said yourself, sorry, I can't remember your name. Andrew. Yeah. The politicians play a big role in this discussion on the national stage, and they're making decisions too. Well, no, bureaucrats are making decisions. So this is the only way you have to make change at the same time is to have right people.
Yeah, like Andrew said, get involved. I mean, that's the main thing. And whether you get involved on your own or whether you come together as an association or an organization, whatever it is, come at it with a specific message that helps solve the situation. going back to your original, back there, dude, I think the messaging is the main thing right now, what we're dealing with on the business side of things, on the TFW front. Is trying to get, people to understand the TFW program is there for businesses that need this labor, right? What Wendy showed is that a lot of the youth are not interested in these jobs, and the idea that they will come to another province to do that job when they're just out of school or still in school, not realistic. So there do need to be some practical solutions to these things, not just a broad stroke no across the board for many of these things as they're kind of going in. Changing that mindset is going to be very difficult, but I think it's a task that we can all sort of work together and work towards.
And I just wanted, there's sort of one area we didn't talk much about, so I just want to close off by saying thank you to all of you for coming, especially on short notice, and thanks to my team pulling it together. This has been recorded precisely because we were not able to get all the government folks in room, and will, with the permission of all the participants, be putting together a bit of a summary. But we do think the voices of business are absolutely critical to moving this forward. And I think, we're seeing some movement by government that suggests that they are hearing what's been said today. But I also wanted to just underscore what Patrick said, which is we've been talking primarily about economic immigrants. We haven't talked at all about humanitarian pathways and refugees. And I don't want to go on a long discussion about that. But having worked on private sponsorship with refugees, I do think there's some interesting lessons that around the importance of social capital. So the evidence is really clear that privately sponsored refugees tend to do better than government sponsored refugees. And why is that? Because a group of people pull together to support them. And, back to Angela's comment about the importance of those personal connections. What if we really tried to amplify that notion of sponsorship, not just mentorship or coaching, but sponsorship across immigrant categories? I think it could be transformational. And two stories I just wanted to quickly tell while I have the mic and before the doors close. We sponsored 1,000 Syrian refugees in 2016 through a program we put together here. And one of the families had 17 people. Where are you going to find accommodation for an extended family of 17 people? So we decided we would send them to Picton, Ontario. And there were a lot of people who are like, oh, Picton, there are no racialized people there. There are no people in hijabs. This is going to be bad. So we loaded them up in a van, sent them to Picton. And after the first few days, we almost had to call private security because the good people of Picton lined up to deliver casseroles and toys and products and goods and so on. So I do think my point is the geographic attention that's now being paid to rural and smaller communities is right on. Like, we need to really understand that our overall economic labor needs don't translate into local needs. So what's going on in Atlantic Canada, very different than Northern Ontario, very different than Alberta. But it also underscores Angela's stories about interpersonal connection. The second thing is, well, a lot of people think that refugees come here for humanitarian reasons, and they do. My father was a refugee. The third largest employer in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, Peace by Chocolate, which was founded by a Syrian refugee. So over time, people who come to Canada, even if they don't come through the economic stream, often end up making significant economic contributions. And I think we need to remember that as well. Anyways, thank you very much. This was just a great day, especially given how quickly it came together. And I hope some of you will stay for some conversation, and thank you very much. I see my team has presents for the people who deserve them. Thanks, round of applause.